Welcome to an Evening with Zecharia Sitchin. Hello, I'm Bonnie Lang, President of the Truth Seeker Company. Since 1873, the Truth Seeker has promoted leading thinkers and pioneers such as Thomas Edison, Susan B. Anthony, Margaret Sanger, Robert Ingersoll, Clarence Darrow, and Thomas Paine, to name a few. All of these innovative thinkers believed in finding the unbiased truth. Who are we? Where did we come from? Are we alone? I was delighted to discover those very questions were asked by Zecharia Sitchin in his first book, The 12th Planet. And I was immensely pleased to discover his findings were based on the objective search for truth. His sources for that book, and the 6 that followed, were the ancient scriptures, not only of the Hebrew people, but also of the Sumerians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and others who recorded what they'd witnessed. It is customary to call those ancient texts myths, but Professor Sitchin has asked, what if the information handed down to us by our predecessors is the truth? The ancient evidence was brought together by Zecharia into a coherent tale that he calls the Earth Chronicles. His discoveries sound like science fiction, but his advanced knowledge and compelling evidence is thought-provoking. The facts recorded in antiquity, the literal understanding of Scripture, are there to be evaluated by the viewer. Professor Sitchin, armed with knowledge of ancient languages and biblical scholarship, acts as an investigative reporter. This video presentation should be viewed with an open mind. It is for each one of us to decide the truth of his interpretation.
Thank you. You know, or you'll find out in tomorrow's papers, that today NASA launched a new spacecraft towards Mars. I didn't watch the launch and I don't know how long it took, but I can tell you that launching me with all these wires took longer. Well, with the mics that I have hooked into me, can you hear me? Pardon?
Very soft, not too well.
Well, that's how I was born. Soft-spoken. And if you can't hear me well, you'll have to read the books. I have started researching my books almost 50 years ago, when I was still in the crib. And the first book was published exactly, maybe not to the day, but to the month, 20 years ago, The 12th Planet. When I wrote that book, and the 6 that followed since then, I was sure that what I'm doing is dealing with the past, that I'm acting as a reporter. Sometimes I'm asked to define myself in one word or one sentence, and the interviewer would ask me, are you an archaeologist, are you a biblical scholar, are you a linguist? And I'm all of that to some extent. But I would define myself as a reporter, because due to my background, my education, what I studied, what I learned, what interested me, and perhaps also because that's what I was meant to be by my destiny, I feel that I'm able to report to people today what people in antiquity had known had recorded and had bequeathed to us in several ways. As I progressed with my research and my writing, and especially when I reached the latest, I don't want to say last because I hope it's not the last, but the latest book, Divine Encounters, I realized that I'm really, while dealing with the past, I'm also dealing with the future, because I firmly believe that the past is our future, and I'll explain in the course of this evening. But what I have found out also is that I'm indeed explaining or throwing light on the present, and that too I will clarify in the course of the evening. So as these things dawned on me that I'm more than just dealing with the past, I decided some 3 years ago, instead of just going by myself to investigate the ancient places, the ancient sites, be it in Egypt or in Peru or in Mexico or in the Near East or on the island of Crete, instead of just going by myself, let me take along a small group of friends, usually about 20, 22 of them, and together not just explore some of the places where I've been, because to the extent possible I have been to every place about which I write, but also to some new places that opened up and one could now visit, even if they are off the beaten track. And I've made it a custom that on the first evening when we arrive at some destination, we sit around and I'm asking each one to introduce himself or herself, and not just the name and what they do, but also I'm curious and others are curious, how did they happen to end up on this expedition with me? How did they end up reading my books? And usually it's some incident, accident, something unexpected, somebody mentioned, they were curious about something and somebody said, you'll find the answer in Sitchin's books, etc. And which I did not expect was that invariably the tables were turned on me and they asked me, well, now you tell us, how did you happen to be involved in your writings and in your research? And though and this is an honest statement, though at the time, certainly at the beginning of interviews and other discussions about my books, I always try to distance myself. For example, in all the books that are part of the Earth Chronicles, 5 of them, because 2 of them, the latest Divine Encounters and Genesis Revisited, are companion books, but the ones that tell the story from time immemorial, ever closer to our time, you will not find the word I in any of them, because I'm just reporting to you and I'm not making myself part of the story. So unexpectedly I found that more and more people are curious about how I became involved in that. And with an apology to some of you who may have heard it before, but because I'm sure some have not heard it, I will tell you and that it all began when I was a schoolboy in what was then Palestine, fortunate to have studied the Bible, the Old Testament, in its original Hebrew language. And I cannot overstress the fact that that makes all the difference, because all the translations are really interpretations. Indeed, if you take some, even in English, some of the biblical translations and put them side by side, you will find that the same verse or verses are translated so that you would not recognize that they're all translating the same text. So it was very important to study it in the original Hebrew language. And we reached chapter 6 of Genesis, which is the story of the great flood of the deluge. And before the Bible starts to tell us about Noah and the ark and how the deluge occurred and how he was saved, there are several very enigmatic verses that are the delight of Sunday preachers, because they deal with the reasons for the deluge, why God decided to wipe mankind off the face of the earth. And they start by saying that those were the days just before the deluge when there were giants upon the earth. And I raised my hand and said, the way you addressed teachers in those days, I said, but excuse me, my teacher, why do you say giants when the word in Hebrew is Nephilim, coming from the root Nephol, which means to come down, to descend, and in the context, to come down from heaven to earth. And I was expecting to be complimented by the teacher. I thought he would say something like, good Sitchin, very good, you know your Hebrew. And instead I was reprimanded. And though it happened some years ago, more than some perhaps, I still remember that incident because it changed my life. And he said in Hebrew, but translated into English, he said something like, Sitchin, sit down. You don't question the Bible. And I was very hurt that day. I remember coming home very hurt and very upset because I was not questioning the Bible. He totally misunderstood me. On the contrary, I was trying to uphold the veracity, the accuracy of the biblical text. And that became an obsession with me ever since then. What did the Bible mean? Whom did it mean by talking about the Nephilim? And later on, I must admit that not at the time when I was 9 or 10 years old, but later on I grasped the significance, or the no lesser significance, of the following verse that talks about the Nephilim as the sons, plural, of the gods, plural, in the skies the way the so-called gods did, and have those incredible weapons and so on and so forth. My studies indicated to me that all these mythologies, really of the Greeks, of the Egyptians, of the Hittites, of the Canaanites, and I can name you a list of all the people called Sumerians that suddenly or unexpectedly appeared in what is today Iraq, between the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it did so, it appeared so suddenly, so unexpectedly, 6,000 years ago. And since, 6,000 years is long ago, so what's the difference between 6,000 and 4,000? But just to give you an idea of what it means, please recall that we are about 2,000 years removed from the time of Jesus, and Abraham was 2,000 years removed from then. And then add to that another 2,000 years, and you'll find yourself where the Sumerian civilization began. And what I really would like to do today, in a relatively short time, with the aid of 80 slides, and if it is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to show you 80,000 words. So I really want to take you on a journey to the past, or a journey in a time machine, for which you need no equipment, you don't need a spacecraft, you don't need a rocket ship, you don't have to wear the clothing. All you have to do is have an open mind. And I would like to start this journey by taking you back, first of all, 6,000 years to the beginning of the Sumerian civilization. Now, one question that comes to mind is, of course, how did people 6,000 years ago look? So this is a picture, a photograph of a statue. There are many statues coming to us from those days of a Sumerian man. They were all very pious. Many of them were bearded. And this, in particular, this one is shown bringing an offering to the temple. These are depictions, again, drawings of statues of Sumerian ladies. And I would just point out to you their elaborate or very elegant clothing, their elaborate hairdos, the noble demeanor. So, all in all, I would say if a Sumerian would come and stand here instead of me or sit among you, you would not find them different. Now, the Sumerian civilization, and again stressing 6,000 years ago, is credited with at least 100 firsts, without which a high civilization like ours today would not be possible. One great Sumerologist, Samuel Kramer, whom I consider my mentor in many respects, wrote a book listing the 100 Sumerian firsts. Since then I found that one could add a few more, at least a few more. But very quickly, without listing all the 100 of them, one of those firsts was the invention of the wheel. What you're looking at, again, this is a photograph of a Sumerian sculpture. This is, as far as I know, the earliest discovered depiction of a wheel, and this is part of a wagon that is drawn by some animals, and these are the Sumerian attendants attending to this vehicle. So the wheel was a Sumerian first. There was, of course, another first without, not only we couldn't have a civilization, but I couldn't write my 7 books, and that is writing. Writing began in Sumer. And the writing there was done on clay tablets. The scribe would take a wet piece of clay and flatten it, and with a stylus that had a sharp end would make signs on the clay, which are called cuneiform. So this is a cuneiform script. The tablets came in various sizes, and this one in particular is part of a text known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is what was found of tablet number 11 from a very long text, and it's a very interesting epic on which I'll touch later this evening. So writing, they used the writing not only to write epic tales, but also to write the so-called mythological texts, the affairs of gods and men. They wrote on it contracts, including marriage contracts, the whole notion of marriage. Some men taking a woman as a wife originated in Sumer. Proverbs originated in Sumer. And mentioning marriage, I would say that one of the proverbs that I recall says, "Man, for his pleasure, marriage. On his thinking it over, divorce." So there were proverbs, there was poetry, there was music. Indeed, some scholars at Berkeley in California were able to decipher Sumerian musical notes written again in this cuneiform script, and reconstructing Sumerian musical instruments, a harp in this case, were actually able to play the Sumerian music and found that it is based, or rather that our music today is based on the same principles that the Sumerians used thousands of years ago. So they were writing which was used for laws, for example, and many of you perhaps are familiar or heard of the code law of Hammurabi, a Babylonian king, and this is highlighted as one of the examples. Can you hear me? Because yes, no, no, well, something. Where are the rocket launchers? No. I'll try to go on, and do you hear me? Well, I'll try to go on. So the famous Code of Hammurabi from around 17 or 1800 BC, which is also almost 4,000 years old, is really a code of crime and punishment. It says, if you do this, your punishment would be death. But 1,000 years before that, more than 1,000 years before that, Sumerian kings also promulgated codes of law. But those were codes of justice. They said, you shall not take away the donkey of a widow. You shall not delay the wages of a day laborer. So these were codes of justice, and the highest title that a Sumerian king could attain was to be called a righteous king, a king who did the right thing, who promulgated justice. So this all was offshoots of the ability to write and to have written records. I sometimes have a tablet with me when the audience is smaller, and I hold it in one hand, and it's a piece of clay, as I said, and I hold up one of my books, and I say, and this looks very primitive, you know, writing on clay, but which one do you think would last another 6,000 years? Now, in Sumerian, which I studied, there are over 400 cuneiform signs. And one of the wonders or the bewilderments of scholars today is how could the Sumerian scribes remember, and how could others read all those signs that look, you know, like symbols with the stylus, long lines, short lines, a complete mixture. Now one day, studying the origins of mathematics, I came across the work of a British mathematician in the 1920s called Ramsey, who dealt with the problem of how many ways are there to connect points with lines without repetition. For example, you see here 3 points connected this way and 3 points connected this way, 4 points connected this way and 4 points connected this way. So that was his theory, known as the Ramsey theory, and the graphs are called the Ramsey graphs. And it struck me that if one analyzes the 400 Sumerian symbols, and here I chose just so many of them, I think about 20, you see that they follow the Ramsey theory, except that this is from thousands of years earlier. And you see here even some very complex ones follow the Ramsey theory. So without belaboring this point, the mathematics or mathematical knowledge of the Sumerians was very, very sophisticated. And this is a sampling of illustrations accompanying mathematical tablets dealing with geometry, especially with how to measure areas with odd shapes. And this had practical meanings, because if somebody died and had the fields and had to divide them between so many heirs, the question was how you measure, how you divide. And these are also very sophisticated shapes which appear in those ancient tablets. They were the first to use bricks for construction, and with the aid of bricks they built high-rise buildings. And these are the remains, actual remains to this day, in southern Iraq, in a city that once was called, and in the Bible it was called Ur. If you hear others lecture on ancient Mesopotamia, you may hear them pronouncing the word but the correct one is Ur. Ur, that is the city from which Abraham came, from which he started his migration. So this structure is about at least 4,000 years old, and this is what remains of it today. And this was what is called a ziggurat, or a step pyramid, with 7 stages that decreased in size as you went up. So this still stands after 4,000 years. And most amazing of Sumerian knowledge, and I'm rushing through the 100 first, because otherwise we'll stay here till tomorrow morning. Most amazing was the Sumerian knowledge in the field of astronomy. There are tablets that not only list all the planets, etc., and I'll touch on that in a little while, but there are tablets that, for example, give the distances between the planets quite accurately. And you, of course, wonder not only how the Sumerians knew that, but what for. Here is an example of an astronomical tablet, and I do my best in all the books to give my readers information where these artifacts are. And I encourage all those who read the books or hear me talk or come on my field expeditions to actually go to those various museums. Now this one is in the British Museum, and this is an astronomical tablet, and those astronomers who could read the cuneiform script at the British Museum said that this is a predictor of lunar eclipses. It predicts lunar eclipses 50 years in advance. In ancient times, whoever had this information and knew how to use it could know 50 years hence when lunar eclipses would occur. When what's on the tablet is converted to modern writing, you see that these are rows of numbers, just rows and rows or columns of numbers. And those who have looked at it and studied it said that the only thing that it brings to mind is a computer printout, and that is thousands of years old. Another aspect that may interest many of you, and certainly those who are interested in either astronomy or astrology, or in the whole notion of a new age. You know, a new age is soon upon us. And that has to do with the division of the heavens around the sun. This is not proportional, because the sun is bigger than the earth. This is the earth as it orbits the sun. And the heavens around the sun have been divided into 12 parts, which is another enigma. Why 12? Again, 12 Olympians, or 12 houses of the zodiac, or 12 tribes of Israel, or 12 disciples of Jesus. Why 12? Where the natural thing for us would be to say 10 or 5. So someone divided the heavens around the sun into 12 parts, chose constellations, distant ones, that represent these segments of the heavens, gave them names, and determined that the first day of spring, from Earth, when we see the sun rising, and there's a moment or a few minutes which are called the time of the heliacal rising, when the sun just rises and the skies behind it are still dark and you can see the stars and the constellations. So against which background of which constellation is the sun rising? And when on the first day we see the sun rising on the first day of spring, rising, say, in the constellation of Pisces, we say we are in the age of Pisces. Now, there is a phenomenon connected with this division of the heavens into 12 parts, and it is called precession. It is really a phenomenon that deals with the fact, unexplainable fact really, that as the Earth orbits the sun and completes a circle of 360 degrees, which again was a Sumerian innovation, dividing the circle into 360 degrees, the Earth does not return exactly to the same spot, but is retarded by 1 degree every 72 years. Now, therefore, the whole cycle takes 25,920 years of retardation, or mathematically, if you divide precisely into 12, that each zodiacal period lasts 2,160 years. Now, the best estimate of modern astronomers is that the first to recognize this phenomenon of retardation called precession was a Greek astronomer living in Asia Minor, today's Turkey, called Hipparchus in the 2nd or 3rd centuries BC. But in fact, this phenomenon was already known to the Sumerians. They were the first to devise and name the zodiac and the 12 constellations, not just the Greeks. And if this sounds incredible, here are the Sumerian names for all the 12 constellations. They started with Guana, meaning the heavenly bull, our Taurus, because at that time, 6,000 years ago, the first day of spring occurred in this constellation. And you see all the names that we are still using today. In fact, even the pictorial depictions of all these zodiacs also was started by them and is still used by us to this day. So the astronomical knowledge was incredible, and it was part of such scientific and sophisticated knowledge that one, of course, must ask the question, and I asked it myself before I even started to write the books: how could the Sumerians know all that 6,000 years ago? Presumably without telescopes, without microscopes, etc. And if you could ask the Sumerians the question, how can you know all that? They answered it in their text. They said, all that we know was taught to us by the Anunnaki. It's a term, Sumerian term, that literally means those who from heaven to earth came. And they said that in time immemorial, which I figured had to have been about almost 450,000 years ago, indeed people, you can call them extraterrestrials, simply because they are from another planet, not from the planet Terra. You can call them ancient astronauts. You can call them the gods with a small g of antiquity, came to Earth for their own reasons, but in time got involved with mankind and gave us all the knowledge that ancient peoples possessed, and maybe even more than that. And now, there are two questions that, each answer brings other questions. And the first question is, how was this knowledge transmitted? If somebody comes from another planet, presumably talking another language, and he meets some Sumerian guy, and how does he give him knowledge? Well, there are tales, and I really deal with that specifically, not just mentioned in this latest book, Divine Encounters, of how communication had taken place. And I chose to illustrate it tonight, first by telling you the tale of a Sumerian king called Gudea. And this is his statue, a full-size statue, but there are others of him seated and standing, and they're all in the Louvre in Paris. And by all means, if you're in Paris, go and take a look. And he was, again, a very pious person, and he was so pious that instead of sleeping in the palace, he would, as often as not, spend the night in the temple. And he recorded that one night, and two long texts, and there's absolutely no doubt, because they are written in very clear script, there's no doubt what they say, there's no misunderstanding of the terminology used. And he says in those records that one night, as he was sleeping in the temple, he had a dream. And in the dream, there appeared to him 3 divine beings. One was a female, and she was holding a tablet showing the planets and stars of the heavens. And she was pointing to him with a stylus at the right connection and orientation. Another one was holding a brick, and the bricks in those days were squarish and not the way our bricks are, and kept pointing at the brick. And the third one held another tablet on which there was a drawing, a schematic drawing, like an architectural plan. And he awoke. And he awoke from a dream. There's no doubt that the text says he dreamt it. He awoke from the dream. And lo and behold, he found the tablet with the architectural plan on his knees. This was the design on the tablet. If you go to the Louvre Museum, you can see that seated statue with that tablet. And he also found beside him the brick, the sample of the brick. Now, to me, such an instance, and I devote the whole chapter to such instances, such an instance brought to my mind the program that I'm sure many of you have watched, but I used to and like to watch it, called The Twilight Zone. And in that program, which, as you saw some things happen, neither the audience, the viewers, nor the hero of the episode really knew what was it? Did it happen? Did he imagine it? Was it a dream? It's not clear. But in some of them, towards the end, when the hero of the episode involved in some problem, some trouble, some danger, is saved by some person, apparition. Somebody appears and saves him by saying, here is a ring, hold the ring and you'll be saved. And when this is over and he's saved, not only with the audience, but the hero of the episode, is certain that it was just an imagined thing. It never happened. But then he puts his hand into his pocket and finds the ring that supposedly was given to him in an unreal event. That's why the program was called The Twilight Zone. And this indeed has happened in the past, and what happened to Gudea is one such example. So dreams, and I'll mention another one soon, dreams were one very important method of communicating between the Anunnaki and whoever they chose to communicate with. And in the Bible, and I'll say it in case I forget to say it later, because I'm sometimes asked about UFOs, and people ask me, what is the best book to read about UFOs? And I say the Bible. And there you will find that in virtually every instance, with one exception perhaps, what Moses experienced on Mount Sinai, the medium of communication were dreams. So this, I know, is something that interests many of you, whether what you dream or what you think you have seen is a reality or not. Now, how did the beings, these divine beings, how did they look? What did Gudea see? How did he know that they are divine beings? We have in the Bible another instance, the tale of Abraham and the so-called three angels, where he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in afternoon, or a hot time of the day, and he suddenly saw, and the Bible uses the word anashim, which means persons. He saw three persons sort of descending, suddenly appearing to him, and he ran towards them, recognizing their divine or angelic nature, and the question is how. So the question sometimes is put to me about these Anunnaki, how did they look? Did they look like us? And I say, no, we look like them. And I'll tell you in a minute why I changed the order of things. But anyway, how did they look? And here is how they looked. This is a depiction of one of them, a female, became very famous even after Sumerian times. Her name was Ishtar, the Greek Astarte or the Canaanite Astarte, etc. And this is a depiction of her, a sculpture in an Assyrian temple, and you see her features, and she is shown as a pilot, World War I pilot perhaps, and she liked to roam the skies of Earth. There are many texts dealing with how she liked to roam the skies of Earth and what happened when she did. There is another depiction of her. This is a life-size statue which was discovered at a place called Mari on the Euphrates River. And when I saw a photograph of this statue flanked by the archaeologists who discovered the statue, my first reaction was, because I knew the names of those who worked there, I said, what is this woman doing with them? Because it's so lifelike. And you can see better what her attire, what she's wearing in the back, and even better from a sketch that I made. And this is the front and this is the back. And you can see that she was wearing some kind of a helmet with, we would call them earphones, with some instrument box held in place by a strap, undoubtedly heavy because it is supported on shoulder pads, and the whole thing is held together tightly in place with straps, and there's this hose coming down from the instrument box. And indeed, this statue explains or justifies various texts that say that when she flew, not just in the skies of heaven, of Earth, but in space, she put on seven pieces of attire of an astronaut, and you can count the 7 pieces here. Now, don't get the idea that they were all only female. There were also male Anunnaki, and here's a depiction of one of them. He was the commander of a spaceport. He's known better by his Semitic name Shamash, the so-called sun god. And he's shown here in his official dress or military dress with wings to indicate his status as a spaceman or commander of a spaceport. Now, in case you think that this is really something that doesn't make sense, because most other scholars refer to such depictions as depictions of birdmen, but you can clearly see in others that this is just attached for dress purposes. So in case you think that this is a silly notion, I prepared this slide. This is the emblem of Apollo 11, the first mission by manned mission by the United States to the moon. And this was the emblem, an eagle. And if you recall, when the touchdown occurred, the message from the moon to Earth was, Houston, the eagle has landed. So the notion of comparing astronauts to eagles is not so preposterous. And again, a Sumerian first. Now, there's no doubt in my mind, and I hope in your minds too by now, that all our notions about angels, mostly depicted as winged beings, come to us from those depictions of the Anunnaki, male or female, as winged beings, people who could fly. And this is, for example, Egyptian, and this is the presumed depiction of the 2 cherubim above the Ark of the Covenant, and this is Hittite, and so on and so forth, throughout the ancient Near East. Now, in case you think that all these depictions of winged beings or astronauts with backpacks comes to us only from the ancient Near East, only from the so-called Old World, I chose just one depiction, and this is from a visit by me and a group that I took with me to Mexico. And you see here a being with a backpack. And does any one of you know where it is? Because probably many of you have been there. Chichen Itza in the Yucatan. So this is one example of what I show and what the people who accompany me see differently from when you go and you just take the normal tour. So even in the New World, these astronauts were not unknown. Another part of the incredible Sumerian knowledge was the knowledge of DNA and the whole concept of genetic engineering. This is how we depict DNA as a double helix, and this is just from a few decades ago. And this is how they depicted either the god of science and biology, or on a vase. I have a copy of it at home. And that was the symbol of the entwined serpents, which to this day is still the symbol of healing and medicine. So this too comes to us from Sumer. And this particular symbol of DNA and the knowledge of genetics and genetic engineering is really a vital part of the Sumerian legacy to us, because it explains to us how we, Homo sapiens, had come about. I have done my best, and not only in the books that are part of the Earth Chronicles, but especially in the two companion books, and especially in Genesis Revisited, I've tried to show and state and convince my readers that there's absolutely no conflict between Bible and evolution. The so-called creationism is just a misunderstanding of the Bible, because if you read Genesis, the first chapter especially, carefully understand the Hebrew of it, you see this is a description of evolution. Except that at some point, when there were already various creatures on earth, where so-called, let's call her for simplicity's sake, ape woman was here. Someone, and the someone according to the Sumerians were the Anunnaki, jumped the gun on evolution, and by combining their genes of one of their males in a process that is described in various texts in great detail, combined their genes, and after a lot of trial and error succeeded in combining it with the egg of, let's call her an ape woman, and bring us Homo sapiens about. We probably would have appeared on Earth anyway in another million years, or 5 or 10, I don't know, but they jumped the gun on evolution, and about 300,000 years ago brought us about. Now, two principal Anunnaki leaders were involved in that. One was their chief scientist, whose name was originally Ea, meaning he whose home is water, and his nickname later on was Enki, meaning Lord Earth, because he was the first to land on Earth with a group of 50. And he was assisted by his half-sister, who was the chief medical officer of the Anunnaki, and her name was Ninhursag. And there is a text describing the trial and error until the perfect model, whom the Bible calls the Adam, not Adam, the Adam, meaning literally the earthling, until the perfect model came about. And the text says that when this was achieved, she raised the baby, the first Adam, perfect model, and shouted, "My hands have made it." And luckily, we found a cylinder seal depiction showing that moment. Now, this is a good time to explain to you what a cylinder seal is. The Sumerians were the first, others followed after them. They were the first to cut a cylinder about an inch and a quarter at the most, from some hard stone, many times semi-precious. And then they would carve on that piece of stone, in reverse, as a negative, whatever image or writing they wanted. And then when this negative was rolled on a piece of wet clay, the way we print our newspapers, the positive image would appear. How they managed to carve on such a small piece of stone as a negative these images, nobody knows to this day, but they did, and this is a depiction of that moment.